Paris. The summer of 1793. This is the sound of the new French Republic. It is the sound of justice, of retribution, of terror. In the heart of the city, at the Place de la Révolution, the guillotine works tirelessly, its blade a symbol of a nation purging itself of the past. King Louis XVI is dead. Marie Antoinette will soon follow. Priests, nobles, merchants, and common citizens, accused of opposing the revolution, are paraded through the streets and executed by the thousands. This is the Reign of Terror, a state-sanctioned campaign of fear and violence orchestrated by Maximilien Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety to forge a new society from the ashes of the old. And yet, on August 10th of that same bloody summer, just a short walk from the guillotine, another sound is heard. It is the sound of the doors of the Louvre Palace, swinging open to the public for the very first time. In the midst of unparalleled carnage, the revolutionary government inaugurates the Musée Central des Arts, a temple to beauty, reason, and human creativity, free for all citizens. How is this possible? How could a regime that perfected mass execution simultaneously orchestrate the birth of the world's greatest public art museum? Was this an act of profound hypocrisy, a moment of cultural sanity in an age of madness? Or was it something far more complex, a key piece in the revolutionary puzzle that reveals the true, terrifying, and utopian ambition of the terror itself? The answer lies behind these gilded doors in a story of how a fortress of kings was stormed not by cannon, but by an idea. To understand the birth of the Louvre Museum, one must first walk the streets of Paris in August 1793. The city was a pressure cooker of paranoia and revolutionary fervor. Beyond its borders, the armies of Austria, Prussia, Britain, and Spain were massed, determined to crush the revolution and restore the monarchy. Within France, a brutal civil war raged in the Vendée region, while armed federalist revolts, organized by the revolution's purged moderate faction, the Girondins, gripped the southern cities of Lyon and Marseille. For the average Parisian, the threat was more immediate. The revolutionary currency, the assignat, had collapsed, and bread prices were perilously high, leading to rationing and constant unrest among the working-class militants known as the sans-culottes. Suspicion was a currency of its own. The law of suspects, passed just a month after the Louvre's opening, would formalize what was already a daily reality. Anyone could be denounced as a counter-revolutionary for a misplaced word, a questionable acquaintance, or simply for not showing enough revolutionary zeal. Between 300,000 and 500,000 people were arrested during the terror, with an estimated 17,000 officially executed and tens of thousands more dying in squalid prisons. This was the world ruled by the radical Jacobins and the Committee of Public Safety. Their goal was not merely to defend France, but to fundamentally remake it. Drawing on the Enlightenment philosophy of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Robespierre believed the revolution could create a perfect republic of virtue, but only once those who fought against this ideal, the tyrants and enemies of the people, were purged. This was a totalizing project. It sought to reshape every aspect of life. A new calendar was created. A new secular religion called the Cult of the Supreme Being was introduced, and a new kind of citizen was to be forged in the crucible of revolution. Viewed from this perspective, the opening of the Louvre ceases to be a contradiction to the terror. It becomes one of its most powerful instruments. The act of transforming the king's private palace into a public museum was a profound statement of cultural warfare. It was the ultimate act of reappropriation, seizing the most potent symbol of royal wealth and exclusivity, and turning it into a tool for the education and enlightenment of the new Republican citizenry. The treasures that had once glorified a single man and his dynasty would now belong to the nation, their purpose repurposed to teach the values of liberty, reason, and the glory of the new French Republic. The museum was not a sanctuary from the Revolution. It was the Revolution, codified and hung on the walls. Before it was a palace of art, the Louvre was a bastion of war. Its story begins around 1190, when King Philip II, preparing to leave on the Third Crusade, ordered the construction of a grim, imposing fortress on the banks of the Seine to protect Paris from English invaders. Its name is shrouded in mystery, perhaps derived from the Latin lupara, for a wolf-hunting den that once stood on the site, or the Saxon word lauer, meaning watchtower. For centuries, its thick stone walls, moat, and central keep, the Grosse Tour, served as a military stronghold, a royal treasury, and a prison. The building's metamorphosis from fortress to palace began in the 14th century under Charles V, who transformed the austere structure into a lavish Gothic residence, complete with a famed royal library. But its most significant transformation came in the 16th century. King Francis I, a great patron of the arts, razed most of the old medieval fortress and began constructing a magnificent new palace in the Renaissance style. It was Francis who truly began the royal art collection, inviting Italian artists to his court and acquiring masterpieces that would one day form the core of the museum's collection, including Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. For the next 150 years, each successive monarch added to the Louvre, expanding its wings and embellishing its interiors. Under Louis XIV and his son, Louis XIV, the palace reached its zenith as the seat of absolute power. Architects like Louis Lavaux were commissioned to create spaces of breathtaking opulence, such as the Galerie d'Apollon. This grand hall, decorated with shimmering gold and paintings celebrating the sun god Apollo, was a direct and deliberate piece of political propaganda. It was the architectural embodiment of Louis XIII, the Sun King, a visual declaration of his divine power and central role in the universe. The Louvre was more than a home. It was the physical manifestation of the French monarchy, a symbol of its wealth, its divine right to rule, and its cultural dominance over Europe. Then, in 1682, everything changed. Louis XIV, seeking to escape the turbulent politics of Paris and build a monument to his own glory on an even grander scale, moved his entire court to his newly constructed palace at Versailles. The Louvre, its grand building campaigns left unfinished, was suddenly abandoned. The heart of French power no longer beat within its walls. For over a century, the vast palace was left in a state of disrepair, its courtyards overgrown and its halls gathering dust. This royal neglect, however, inadvertently planted the seeds of the Louvre's future. The empty palace did not remain so for long. It was gradually taken over by a collection of royal academies, most notably the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture, the institution that controlled the production and teaching of art in France. The palace was also converted into residences and studios for artists who enjoyed royal patronage. By the 18th century, painters like Jean-Honoré Fragonard and Jacques-Louis David lived and worked within its walls, their children reportedly playing on the rooftops. Furthermore, the palace became a site of public art exhibition. Beginning in 1699, the Royal Academy held its official art exhibition, the famous Salon, in the Louvre's Salon Carré. These salons, while still elite affairs, gave the Parisian public their first regular access to the world of contemporary art within the walls of the former royal residence. The monarchy's decision to move to Versailles had physically and symbolically detached it from the capital. The Louvre was no longer the active center of political power, but had become, by default, the center of French artistic life. This century of repurposing slowly eroded its identity as a private royal fortress and primed it for its next most radical transformation. The revolutionaries did not have to invent the idea of the Louvre as a palace of the arts. The monarchy, through its own neglect, had already laid the foundation. The physical transformation of the Louvre was preceded by an intellectual one. The 18th century was the great age of reason, the Enlightenment, a period when philosophers championed the power of human reason, scientific inquiry, and universal knowledge to reform society. They began to challenge the very foundations of the Ancien regime, including the idea that culture was the private property of the crown. In France, writers and thinkers known as the philosophes began to argue for the public display of the royal collections. The most prominent voice was that of Denis Diderot, the co-editor of the Monumenta Encyclopédie. Diderot and others argued that the king's vast art collection was not his personal property, but the nation's cultural heritage, its patrimoine. They envisioned a national museum where these works would be displayed for the public. Such an institution, they believed, would serve a threefold purpose. It would educate the citizenry, provide models of excellence for artists to study, and project the cultural glory of the French nation. This was a profoundly democratic and revolutionary concept, that art and knowledge were public goods, essential for the creation of an enlightened society. The idea gained traction. So much so that in 1750, King Louis XV made a tentative gesture, temporarily exhibiting a selection of about 100 paintings from the royal collection at the Luxembourg Palace in Paris. While the exhibition was short-lived, it was immensely popular and only fueled the public's appetite for a permanent national museum. The idea of transforming the now underused Grande Galerie of the Louvre into such a museum began to circulate. But progress under the monarchy was slow, hampered by a lack of funds and political will. It would take the cataclysm of revolution to turn the philosopher's dream into a reality. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, it unleashed a storm of popular fury against the symbols of the old order. For many revolutionaries, art was not a neutral cultural treasure. It was the embodiment of the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the church, the very institutions they sought to destroy. This led to a wave of iconoclasm, or image breaking. The period was so destructive that the term vandalisme was coined by the Abbé Grégoire to describe the barbaric destruction of art and monuments. Across France, mobs tore down statues of kings and saints. At the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, the heads of the biblical kings adorning the facade were violently removed, mistaken for French royals. Royal emblems were chiseled off buildings, tapestries were burned for their gold thread, and bronze statues were melted down to forge cannons for the revolutionary armies. It was a period of immense cultural destruction, a physical attempt to erase the past. Yet, at the very same time, a powerful counter-movement for preservation emerged. Even as the new revolutionary government nationalized the vast properties of the church and the fleeing aristocrats, émigrés, it also recognized that these properties contained the nation's artistic heritage. To manage this cultural crisis, the National Assembly created a commission of monuments, tasked with inventorying confiscated property and saving objects of artistic and historical importance. The most remarkable figure in this preservation effort was Alexandre Lenoir, a young painter who took it upon himself to rescue France's sculptural heritage from the revolutionary mobs. Appointed as the guardian of a depot in a former convent, Lenoir raced across Paris, often at great personal risk. He was once wounded while trying to protect the tomb of Cardinal Richelieu, to salvage statues, tombs, and architectural fragments from desecrated churches and chateaus. He amassed an extraordinary collection of rescued artifacts. To protect his bronze statues from being melted for the war effort, he cleverly covered them with plaster to make them look like less valuable marble. In 1795, Lenoir opened his depot to the public as the Musée des Monuments Français, Museum of French Monuments. It was one of Europe's first popular museums, arranging the rescued sculptures chronologically by century to tell a visual history of France. Lenoir's museum was a chaotic, romantic, and deeply personal creation, born from the emergency of the moment. It was a grassroots effort to save the past. The official state-sanctioned decision to create a grand national museum in the Louvre can be seen as the government's response to this same crisis. The Louvre project represented an attempt to institutionalize and control the process of preservation. Where Lenoir's museum was an ad hoc refuge, the Louvre was to be a monumental, rationally organized temple of art. It was the state seizing control, not just of the art itself, but of the very narrative of France's cultural history, deciding what would be saved, how it would be displayed, and what story it would tell the citizens of the new republic. The inauguration of the Muséum Central des Arts on August 10, 1793, was a masterstroke of political symbolism. The date was not chosen by chance. It was freighted with revolutionary meaning. It was the first anniversary of one of the most pivotal and violent days of the Revolution. August 10, 1792, the day a Parisian mob, backed by the National Guard, stormed the Tuileries Palace, massacred the king's Swiss guards, and forced the royal family to flee for their lives. That event led directly to the suspension of the king's powers and the formal abolition of the French monarchy a month later. By opening the Louvre on this anniversary, the revolutionary government sent a powerful and unambiguous message. The day that marked the death of the monarchy would now mark the birth of the People's Museum. The king's fortress had been breached, his private treasures seized, and his home transformed into public property. To underscore the point, the opening was timed to coincide with a massive public spectacle called the Festival of Unity and Indivisibility, which celebrated the ratification of the new Republican Constitution. An enormous plaque was placed over the entrance to the Galerie d'Apollon, the very hall designed to glorify the Sun King, Louis XIV, announcing this grand gesture to the people. The symbolism was clear. Absolute monarchy was dead, and its cultural legacy now belonged to every citizen of the French Republic. Imagine being a citizen of Paris on that day. You walk past the armed guards, through the grand courtyards that were once the exclusive domain of royalty, and into the Grande Galerie. For the first time, you are not a subject, but a visitor, an owner. What you would have seen was an exhibition of 537 paintings and 184 other objects of art, primarily sculptures and decorative arts. The collection was a testament to the Revolution's power of confiscation. The vast majority of the works came from the former royal collection, amassed over centuries by kings like Francis I and Louis XIV. Masterpieces by Italian Renaissance artists, including Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, hung alongside works by French masters like Nicolas Poussin and Charles Lebrun. The rest of the collection was made up of art seized from the nationalized properties of the Catholic Church and from the estates of émigrés, the nobles who had fled France in fear of the Revolution. However, first-hand accounts suggest the reality of the opening was far from the polished ideal. The early days were hectic and disorganized. Privileged artists still lived in their apartments within the palace, and the exhibition itself was described by observers as a poorly maintained repository of diverse and motley works. The paintings were hung without labels, crowded together frame to frame, from the floor to the high ceilings, more in the style of a cluttered aristocratic picture gallery than a modern educational museum. Yet, the principle was revolutionary. Admission was free to the public for 3 days out of every 10-day Republican week. The other days were reserved for artists to study and copy the masterpieces. For the first time in history, a national art collection of this magnitude was accessible to all. The grand revolutionary ideal soon collided with practical realities. The Louvre Palace, having been largely neglected for over a century since Louis XIV's departure, was in a dire state of disrepair. The early years of the museum were a constant struggle against a decaying building. The painter Hubert Robert, one of the museum's first curators, was tasked with the monumental job of cataloging the flood of confiscated art, while also drawing up ambitious plans for renovations that the cash-strapped government could never afford to implement. The situation became untenable. In 1796, just 3 years after its celebrated opening, the Muséum Central des Arts was forced to close its doors to the public due to serious structural problems with the building. The great experiment seemed to have failed. The Palace of the People was once again empty, its treasures locked away in a crumbling, unsafe structure. It would not fully reopen until 1801, under the patronage of a new, powerful leader who saw the museum's potential not just as a tool of revolution, but as an instrument of empire. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who would rescue the Louvre from its state of limbo and transform it into the most famous museum in the world, was Napoleon Bonaparte. After seizing power in 1799, Napoleon saw the immense political and cultural potential of a grand national museum. He ordered the necessary repairs, reopened the Louvre in 1801, and in 1803, with characteristic modesty, renamed it the Musée Napoléon. To run his new museum, Napoleon appointed an equally ambitious and energetic director, Dominique Vivant Denon. Denon, a skilled artist, writer, and diplomat from the old regime, had proven his loyalty and resourcefulness by accompanying Napoleon's expedition to Egypt, where he sketched ancient monuments under enemy fire. As the Louvre's first true director, Denon's mission was to make it the greatest museum the world had ever seen. He achieved this through a systematic and unprecedented campaign of artistic plunder. As Napoleon's armies conquered Europe, Denon followed in their wake, personally selecting the finest masterpieces from the collections of Italy, the Low Countries, Germany, and Spain, to be sent back to Paris as spoils of war. Triumphal processions carried captured artworks through the streets of Paris. Paolo Veronese's massive The Wedding at Cana was taken from a Venetian monastery. The ancient Roman sculpture of Laocoon and his sons was seized from the Vatican. Masterpieces by Raphael, Titian, and countless others were funneled into the Musée Napoléon. Denon's vision and Napoleon's ambition created something entirely new. The Universal Museum, an institution that aimed to gather the greatest artistic achievements of all civilizations under a single roof for the glory of France. Under Napoleon and Denon, the Louvre became the undisputed cultural capital of Europe. It was not just a collection of art, it was a powerful symbol of French imperial might and a model for the world. Its very existence and the prestige it conferred upon France sparked a new kind of national ambition in other European nations. After Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo in 1815, one of the key demands of the victorious Allies was the restitution of the looted art. In a painful and politically charged process, overseen by a reluctant Denon, more than 5,000 works were returned to their countries of origin. But the idea of the great national museum could not be put back in the box. The experience of seeing their national treasures displayed in the Louvre and the national pride stirred by their return inspired other countries to create their own grand public museums. The Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid, which opened its doors in 1819, was a direct result of this phenomenon. It was founded with the explicit goal of displaying the magnificent Spanish royal collection and demonstrating to the world that Spanish art was of equal merit to any other national school, a clear response to the cultural dominance of the Louvre. In Germany, the Alte Pinakothek in Munich, opened in 1836 to house the Wittelsbach dynasty's collection, was architecturally and conceptually a descendant of the Louvre model. The revolutionary French concept of a national museum, perfected and amplified by Napoleon, had become the new standard for cultural power and prestige across Europe. The story of the Louvre's birth over 2 centuries ago is not merely a historical curiosity. It is the origin story of the modern museum as we know it, and its complex legacy continues to shape our world today. The Louvre pioneered many of the practices that are now standard, from the science of art conservation and restoration, a necessity given the poor state of many confiscated works, to the very idea of the museum as an institution for public education and civic betterment. But its legacy is also deeply fraught. The concept of the Universal Museum, born in the Louvre, was built on a foundation of military conquest and cultural appropriation. This history is the direct ancestor of today's most heated cultural debates. The arguments over the restitution of artifacts like the Elgin marbles from the British Museum to Greece or the Benin bronzes to Nigeria are echoes of the debates that raged in 1815 over the return of Napoleon's loot. The fundamental questions first raised by the French Revolution and embodied by the Louvre are still with us. Who owns culture? Is a masterpiece the heritage of all humanity, best seen in a universal museum? Or does it belong to the nation and people who created it? The Louvre did not answer these questions. It was the first institution to force the world to ask them. We return to where we began, to the paradox of a palace of light born in an age of terror. The Louvre is a monument built on the most profound contradictions of the human spirit. It was founded on the Enlightenment's highest ideals of reason, democracy, and the pursuit of universal knowledge. Yet it was inaugurated during a period of state-sponsored paranoia and mass execution. It was conceived as a palace for the people, a symbol of the overthrow of tyranny. Yet it was perfected by an emperor and filled with the spoils of his wars. It stands as a testament to the unique glory of French culture. Yet its example gave birth to national museums across the globe, each celebrating its own distinct heritage. The Louvre is a place of quiet contemplation, born from the loudest and most violent revolution in modern history. Its story is not one of simple triumph, but of a messy, chaotic, and often brutal struggle to define what a nation is, what culture is for, and who has the right to own the past. The stones of this palace have witnessed the fall of kings, the fury of the mob, the ambition of an emperor, and the birth of a modern world. Perhaps its greatest lesson is this, that even in our darkest, most destructive moments, the impulse to create, to preserve, to understand, and to share the story of who we are can, against all odds, find a way to endure. Today, the Louvre welcomes over 10 million visitors annually. It's become so synonymous with public access to art that we forget how revolutionary this concept once was. But the principles established on that August day in 1793 shape every museum in the world. Think about the last time you walked into a museum. You probably didn't have to prove your noble birth. You didn't need a letter of introduction from a duke. You paid a modest fee, or perhaps nothing at all, and entered a space where Rembrandt and Picasso, ancient Egypt and medieval France, all waited for your contemplation. This is the invisible revolution that surrounds us. Every museum label written in clear language, instead of aristocratic codes. Every education program that brings school children face-to-face with masterpieces. Every free admission day. All of these trace their DNA back to August 10th, 1793. But the revolution isn't complete. Today's challenges are different. But no less important, how do we decolonize museums? How do we make them truly representative of all cultures? How do we balance preservation with access, education with entertainment? These are the questions the Louvre's founders would recognize, because they're still about the fundamental issue. Who owns culture? The Louvre of 2025 would astonish those first visitors in 1793. The glass pyramid that now serves as its entrance, designed by I.M. Pei and initially reviled, now beloved, represents a new kind of transparency. Virtual tours allow people who could never travel to Paris to walk its galleries. The museum has returned artifacts to their countries of origin, acknowledging that cultural democracy means respecting all cultures. Yet, challenges remain. Museums worldwide struggle with funding, with relevance, with the digital age's assault on attention spans. Some argue that Instagram has reduced great art to backdrop for selfies. Others worry that video games and virtual reality will make physical museums obsolete. But here's what the skeptics miss. The human hunger for authentic encounter with beauty and meaning hasn't diminished. If anything, in our age of digital reproduction, the desire to stand before the actual canvas, to see the real brushstrokes, to share space with greatness, has intensified. The revolutionaries of 1793 understood something profound, that art isn't just decoration for the wealthy. It's a fundamental human need, as essential as bread or freedom. When they opened the Louvre, they weren't just displaying pictures. They were declaring that every human being has the right to transcendence. And that declaration still echoes. Let me take you back to that first day one more time. August 10th, 1793. Among the crowds pushing through the Louvre's doors was a young boy named Pierre-Joseph Redoute. His family were artisans, painters of decorative flowers for the aristocracy. The revolution had destroyed their livelihood, but in the Louvre's galleries, Pierre-Joseph saw flower paintings by the Dutch masters. He saw how they captured not just the appearance, but the soul of each bloom. He spent hours studying, sketching, learning. That boy would grow up to become the greatest botanical artist of his age, painting for both Napoleon's Empress Josephine and later for science. This is the true power of the public museum, not just preservation, but transformation. How many redoutes have been created by that simple act of opening doors? How many lives have been changed by encountering beauty they never knew existed? In our age of inequality, when billionaires build private museums and art becomes a financial asset locked in free ports, the principle of August 10, 1793 is more vital than ever. The Louvre's opening wasn't just a historical event. It was a promise that beauty belongs to all of us. That culture is our common inheritance, that the treasures of human creativity should lift all souls, not just privileged ones. Every time a child from a disadvantaged background sees their first Van Gogh, every time a refugee finds solace in ancient art from their homeland, every time someone discovers they're not alone because an artist centuries ago felt what they feel, the revolution of August 10, 1793 continues. The Louvre opened its doors that day, but what really opened was the future. And so we return to where we began, that humid August morning in revolutionary Paris, when humanity decided that beauty should be free. The men and women who opened the Louvre that day couldn't have imagined that their action would ripple across centuries, creating a world where museums stand in every major city, where culture is considered a human right, where art education is part of every childhood. But they did imagine something. They imagined you. They imagined a future where every person, regardless of birth or wealth, could stand before greatness and feel enlarged by it. They imagined a world where beauty wasn't hoarded, but shared, where culture wasn't a wall between classes, but a bridge between souls. That world isn't perfect. The revolution they started isn't finished. But every time you walk into a museum, you're part of their dream, made real. If this story has moved you, if you want to dive deeper into this remarkable moment when art met revolution, check out the carefully curated book recommendations in the description below and in the first pinned comment. These aren't just history books. They're doorways into understanding how we became who we are. Share your thoughts in the comments. What was your first museum experience? How has art changed your life? What do you think the museums of the future should look like? Subscribe to join us on more journeys through history's pivotal moments. Moments when humanity chose transformation over tradition, courage over comfort, beauty over barriers. Because that's what happened on August 10th, 1793. In a city torn by revolution, in a world convulsed by change, humanity chose to believe that beauty could save us. And maybe, just maybe, it has.